They say there are lines that should never be crossed. You know the kind, lines that feel invisible until you're standing right on top of them, heart pounding, palms sweating, knowing that if you take even one step forward, there's no going back. But what happens when someone you love, someone who trusts you, someone who looks at you like you're the only safe place they've ever known, asks you to cross that line? Not with words. No, it's never that simple. It starts with the quiet things, the long looks, the small touches, the way the air in the room starts to shift when you're alone together. And you tell yourself it's innocent. You need to believe it's innocent. Until one day, you just can't lie to yourself anymore. It's been 6 months. 6 long, restless months since that night. And I still wake up wondering, was I the villain in this story? Or was I just a woman aching, lonely, clinging to the only warmth that had entered my life in years? I haven't told anyone this. Not a soul. Not my friends. Not my therapist. Not even God, if I'm being honest. Because how do you confess something when you're not even sure what it was? How do you explain a moment that felt both wrong and needed? Let me paint the picture for you. It was a cold, rainy Thursday. The kind of day that makes everything feel heavier. The sky had been gray for weeks, and the silence in my house had gotten so loud I could barely think straight. And then he showed up. My nephew. Ethan. The boy I used to hold in my arms when he was just a baby. The kid who lost his mom, my sister, far too young. He needed a place to stay. And I needed. I don't know. I thought I was helping him. I wanted to help him. But what unfolded over the weeks that followed? It's hard to put into words. It wasn't one moment, it was hundreds of tiny ones, piling up like raindrops on a window until suddenly, you can't see clearly anymore. What do you do when the comfort you give starts to feel like something else? When grief and affection blur into something you're too ashamed to name. I've asked myself that question every single day. And maybe, by telling this story, I'll finally start to understand how I got here. All I ask is that you listen, not with judgment, but with an open heart. Because sometimes life doesn't give us clear answers. Sometimes it just leaves us with the pieces, and we have to figure out how to carry them. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold to hear the stories no one else dares to tell. This one will leave you breathless. And it's only just begun. It's strange, isn't it? How a house can feel alive when it's full of voices, and how quickly it can turn into a tomb once the voices are gone. After the divorce, I moved back into my childhood home. It was supposed to be temporary, just until I figured things out. But the months passed, and then a year, and before I knew it, I was still there. Still waking up to creaky floorboards and empty rooms. Still listening to the echo of my own footsteps like they were trying to keep me company. The house used to feel warm, my mother's music drifting from the kitchen radio, my father humming as he fixed something that didn't really need fixing, my sister laughing in the hallway about something only she found funny. Now it just felt hollow. Too big. Too quiet. Too full of ghosts I hadn't made peace with. I was 48, newly divorced, and tired in a way that no sleep could fix. I'd spent years married to a man who made me feel invisible. At first, I thought he was just distracted, work, stress, life. But then I realized I could scream, cry, even bleed in front of him, and he'd still look past me. I don't think he ever saw me. Not really. And eventually, I stopped trying to be seen. So when it ended, it wasn't with fire or fury. Just silence. The same kind of silence that had already lived in our marriage for years. I'd been alone ever since. Not just in the literal sense. But that soul-deep, aching loneliness that seeps into everything. That quiet grief of knowing no one is waiting for you at the end of the day. Then came Ethan. It started with a phone call. His voice was calm, polite, but I could hear the hesitation. The vulnerability. He said he was planning to transfer to an art school near my town. That it was closer, more affordable, and that he'd love to stay with me for a little while. Just until he got settled. I didn't even hesitate. Of course I said yes. I loved that boy. I always had. After my sister passed, I tried to stay in his life as much as I could. But distance and grief, they make things complicated. Now, it felt like I was being given a second chance. When he arrived, he looked taller. broader in the shoulders. His jaw more defined. But his eyes, they were still the same. Soft, warm, kind. He gave me the biggest hug, and for a second, I felt like I could breathe again. "It smells like cinnamon and old books in here," he joked, stepping into the house. Just like I remember. I laughed, brushing away tears I didn't want him to see. He brought light with him, truly. He filled the space with music, sketches, and quiet laughter that made the walls feel alive again. He cooked. He cleaned. He'd pour me tea exactly the way I liked it, black, with 1 drop of honey and a cinnamon stick. And every time, he'd say, "Just like you used to make for me when I was little." It made my heart ache in the sweetest way. There was something so gentle about him. So aware. Like he could sense when the loneliness started creeping in, and he'd walk into the room at just the right moment with a joke, a story, or a smile. He'd sit across from me at the kitchen table, talking about his dreams, his art, his vision, his heartbreaks. And somewhere in those conversations, I forgot to feel old. Forgot to feel broken. He'd tell me about the women he'd dated, how shallow the connections felt, how hard it was to find someone who understood him. "You ever feel like most people are just performing?" he asked one night, eyes flickering across the candlelight. "Like no one's really real anymore?" I nodded. Because yes, I knew exactly what that felt like. And there it was again, that pull. That invisible thread tying us together, tighter each day. He reminded me so much of my sister. His smile, his thoughtfulness. Even the way he walked, like he was always moving to a rhythm no one else could hear. But there was more. Something deeper. The way he looked at me sometimes, like he was watching, not out of curiosity, but understanding. Like he saw the pain I didn't speak out loud. And didn't flinch. I told myself I was imagining things. That I was just projecting. That I was vulnerable and lonely and reading into gestures that didn't mean anything. But it wasn't just me. There was a shift. A subtle one. Like we were both tiptoeing towards something neither of us wanted to name. He started staying up later. We'd talk into the night, sitting on the couch with a blanket between us and too much unsaid floating in the air. He'd ask questions. Real questions. About love. About regret. About the choices I'd made. And he listened, in a way no one had in years. It scared me, honestly. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt safe. Like maybe, just maybe, I'd found a soul that understood mine. And that's where everything began to shift. I didn't know it yet, but the path had already started forming beneath our feet. A path that would lead us somewhere neither of us expected, and somewhere we couldn't come back from. But I'll tell you this, it wasn't fast. It wasn't reckless. It was quiet. Slow. Soft like a whisper. And that's what made it so dangerous. Because when something feels gentle, you don't see the damage it's doing until it's too late. There's a moment, so small, so quiet, that you almost don't notice it when it happens. But later, when you look back, you realize that was the moment everything began to change. It started with something simple. A Thursday night. We'd just finished dinner, grilled vegetables, lemon chicken, and red wine. Ethan had insisted on cooking that night. Said it helped him clear his mind before a new art assignment. I watched him in the kitchen from across the room, how naturally he moved in my space, how he hummed as he chopped, how he always knew exactly where everything was, like he'd lived there all his life. It was comforting and strange. After dinner, we sat in the living room, the fireplace glowing soft in the background. The storm outside had turned into a steady drizzle, the kind that makes the whole world feel like it's exhaling. I poured us each another glass of wine. And that's when the conversation drifted slowly, like a river changing course. He asked me about my marriage. About the things that went wrong. About what it felt like to fall out of love, or worse, to never have really been in love at all. His questions weren't invasive. They were gentle, patient, like he was peeling back the layers of something fragile. And I answered. Honestly. More honestly than I'd answered anyone in a long time. I told him about the years I spent feeling like a shadow in my own home. About how I learned to stop expecting affection. About the nights I'd cry quietly in the bathroom so no one would see me break. about how empty the word marriage had started to feel by the end. He listened, really listened. His eyes never left mine, not in that casual way people look at you while their mind drifts off. No, this was different. This was attention in its purest form. At some point, without realizing it, I'd leaned in. Maybe he had too. Our elbows touched on the couch, and I didn't move away. The wine, the rain, the glow of the fire, it all wrapped around us like a soft cocoon. And in that stillness, he reached out. His hand slid over mine. Not forcefully, not urgently, just gently. Like it had every right to be there. It lasted maybe 3 seconds. 4 at most. But it was long enough. Long enough for me to feel the heat of his palm. Long enough for my breath to catch in my throat. Long enough for my mind to split into two, one half screaming that this wasn't okay, and the other half whispering, "Don't pull away." And then, just like that, he let go. He laughed at something I'd said earlier, lightly, casually, and the moment passed. Or at least, it pretended to. I laughed too, maybe a little too loud, and excused myself to wash the wine glasses. I stood at the sink longer than I needed to. Let the hot water run over my hands until they turned pink. And I stared out the window at the rain-soaked night, heart beating like a drum I couldn't silence. What just happened? Was it a mistake? Was it nothing? Was I imagining things, reading too much into something innocent because I was touch-starved and vulnerable and aching for connection? Or was it something else? That night, I told myself he was just being sweet. That it was the wine, the mood, the memories. But part of me knew that something unspoken had just begun to rise between us. A current, a shift, the kind you can't see, but you feel it deep, pulsing beneath the surface of every conversation, every glance, every silence. I went to bed that night restless. I tossed, I turned, I replayed that moment 100 different ways. And then I dreamt of him. Not in a graphic way, but in that unsettling, emotional way that leaves you shaken when you wake. He was looking at me, just looking, his face close to mine, his hand on my cheek. And in the dream, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Desired. Seen. Known. I woke up with my heart racing, guilt already blooming in my chest like a bruise. This was wrong. It had to be wrong. He was my nephew. He was family. He was grieving. And I was supposed to be the stable one. The caretaker. The adult. But something had shifted. And once it shifts, you can't just snap things back into place. You can pretend. You can act like everything's normal. You can laugh at his jokes and thank him for dinner and tell yourself it was nothing. But the truth lingers. It settles in the spaces between your words. It breathes into your silences. It waits. And that moment, his hand on mine, so soft, so steady. That was the beginning. For days after that moment on the couch, I couldn't think straight. Everything looked the same. Ethan still made his morning coffee, still played his soft jazz in the afternoons, still greeted me with that gentle, familiar smile, but everything felt different. I started second-guessing everything. The way he looked at me. The way I laughed a little too loud when he said something funny. The way my heart skipped a beat every time his arm brushed mine in the kitchen. I'd stand at the stove, pretending to focus on dinner, while inside, I was unraveling. Was I imagining this? Was I seeing something that wasn't there? Was I projecting my loneliness onto someone who just needed family? That question haunted me the most. He'd lost his mother, and I was all he had left. He needed comfort, not confusion. And I was supposed to be a safe place. But my mind kept drifting back, over and over, to the feel of his hand on mine. The way he held my gaze a second longer than he should have. The softness in his voice when he asked about my past, my pain, my dreams. It wasn't just grief. It wasn't just affection. It was something else. And it scared me. Late at night, I'd sit on the edge of my bed and stare at myself in the mirror across the room. Not just look, stare. Trying to see what he saw. Trying to understand why now, why me. Was there still something left in me worth wanting? My ex-husband never made me feel beautiful. Not in the real way. Sure, there were compliments, mechanical ones, tied to birthdays and anniversaries. but never in those quiet, unexpected moments where it mattered most. He used to walk past me like I was furniture. Say he loved me with his mouth while his eyes stared through me. Touch me like it was an obligation, not desire. And slowly, over time, I shrank. Not just in spirit, but in presence. I stopped wearing bright colors. Stopped laughing too loud. Stopped hoping for touch that wasn't routine. I learned to disappear. Gracefully. Quietly. Completely. But now, Ethan. He saw me. In ways that felt too raw, too real, too dangerous. He started complimenting me more. Softly, casually, but deliberately. You always smell like vanilla and cinnamon. It's comforting. That blue dress makes your eyes look like the ocean. I love your laugh. It's real. Most people fake it, but yours? It comes from somewhere deep. It was never creepy. Never forward. It was worse. It was sincere. And that sincerity tore something open inside me. I wanted to tell him to stop. To create some distance. To remind him of what we were supposed to be. But I didn't. I couldn't. Because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a ghost. I felt wanted. And that terrified me more than anything else. Because what kind of woman craves attention from someone who calls her aunt? What kind of woman entertains feelings like that, knowing the weight they carry? Every time he smiled at me like that, it chipped away at my resolve. Like water slowly wearing down stone. I was the adult. I was supposed to be the strong one. The protector. The one with boundaries. But my boundaries had become blurred lines. And those lines were getting harder and harder to see. There were moments when I'd catch him looking at me from across the room, not in an obvious way. No, it was subtle. Careful. But intimate. Like he was searching for a part of me no one else had ever tried to find. I'd pretend not to notice. I'd busy myself with dishes, or flip through a book I wasn't really reading. But inside, my thoughts were screaming. This isn't right. You know it's not right. But why does it feel like the most honest thing you've felt in years? I tried to give myself space to think. Went for long walks alone. Sat in the park with a journal I didn't have the courage to write in. Every time I tried to put my feelings into words, my pen froze. Because naming it made it real. And real meant dangerous. Still, it grew. That feeling. Like a vine wrapping slowly around my heart. Soft, silent, and impossible to ignore. He'd walk into the room, and my breath would hitch, just a little. He'd lean over to show me one of his sketches, and I'd feel the heat of his body next to mine, and have to remind myself to blink, to breathe, to not feel what I was feeling. One night, I found myself standing at his bedroom door. Not for any reason. Just standing there, listening to the soft scratch of pencil on paper, the faint music playing from his speaker. I imagined knocking, asking to talk, telling him everything that was tearing me up inside. But I didn't. I walked away. Back to my room. Back to my guilt. Back to the silence. Because I didn't know what scared me more, telling him how I felt, or finding out that he felt the same. Looking back, it didn't happen all at once. It was like a tide, rising so slowly you don't notice until the water is around your ankles, then your knees, and suddenly, you're submerged. That's what it felt like with Ethan. The tension between us wasn't loud or obvious. It was quiet, careful. The kind that grows in the silence between words. In the looks held just a second too long. In the space between two bodies that keeps getting smaller without ever fully closing. At first, it was subtle. The way his hugs lingered. The way his hand would rest on the small of my back when he passed behind me in the kitchen. The way our eyes would meet from across the room, and neither of us would look away right away anymore. Every glance carried weight. Every touch felt like a question. I told myself it was still nothing. Still innocent. But deep down, I knew. Then came the night of the movie. It was one of those long, quiet evenings. The kind where the world outside feels far away, and everything inside feels too close. We decided to watch an old film, one of those black and white classics I loved. Ethan had never seen it, so I made popcorn, and he grabbed a blanket. We curled up on the couch, like we had a dozen times before. But this time felt different. The air between us was thicker. Not uncomfortable, just charged. Halfway through the movie, he leaned in, slowly, and rested his head on my shoulder. Just like that. No words, no warning, and my whole body went still. Not because I didn't want it, but because I did. And that terrified me. His hair brushed my cheek, and his breath was warm against my collarbone. My fingers trembled around the wine glass in my hand, and I focused hard on the screen, trying not to feel his weight on me. Trying not to breathe too deeply. Trying not to want. But I did. And I hated myself for it. I told myself he was tired. That it was platonic. That I was making it more than it was. But then, he didn't move. Not for the rest of the film. And neither did I. We sat there, wrapped in the same blanket, saying nothing, but everything was being said in the silence. A few days later, the storm came. A real one, thunder, lightning, sheets of rain beating against the windows. The lights flickered twice and then went out completely. I found a few candles in the drawer, lit them, and placed them around the living room. The glow was soft, golden. The house looked different, warmer somehow. Like something out of a dream. Ethan joined me on the floor in front of the fireplace. We shared the blanket again, drinking tea this time instead of wine. The flickering candlelight made his face look older. Or maybe it just made the pain in his eyes more visible. We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain, watching the fire. Then, without looking at me, he said, "I used to think grief was like a wound. Something that would scab over and eventually heal. But it's not. It's more like a room. And you just live in it. Some days the lights are on. Other days, you can't see anything at all." I didn't know what to say. So I reached over and placed my hand on his. Just lightly. Just enough to say, "I hear you." And then he looked at me. Not with tears. Not with a smile. Just with this quiet, raw honesty I hadn't seen in anyone in so long. "Why does it feel like we're the only two who understand each other?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't answer. Because he was right. And we both knew it. I felt something rise up in my chest, something too big to swallow and too dangerous to say out loud. So I stood up, told him I was going to get more wine. But really, I just needed to move. To break the tension. To remind myself of who I was and what this was not supposed to be. My heart was thundering in my chest as I walked to the kitchen. I gripped the counter, eyes closed, trying to push it all down. And then, I heard his voice. Soft, tentative. Like a confession left on a doorstep. "I dream about you sometimes." I froze. Every muscle in my body went still. He didn't say it loudly. He didn't even sound sure he meant to say it out loud. But I heard it. Clear as day. I turned slowly, still holding the wine bottle in my hand, the candlelight from the living room casting long shadows on the walls. He wasn't looking at me when I walked back in. Just staring into the fire. Like maybe the flames could explain what he'd just done. I sat down beside him, careful to keep just a little space between us this time. But that space felt thin. Fragile. Like a barrier made of glass, see-through, delicate, and one word away from shattering completely. I didn't ask what the dreams were about. And he didn't offer to tell me. But the silence that followed, it said enough. That night, after he went to bed, I sat in the living room by myself for a long time. Candles burning low. Rain still falling. My thoughts louder than any storm. What scared me most wasn't that Ethan had dreams about me. What scared me was that I'd been having them too. There's a moment, one moment, when everything you've been holding back slips. And once it does, you can't unfeel it. You can't unknow it. You can't take it back. That night, that moment, was mine. It was late. The kind of late where the rest of the world feels like it's asleep, but inside your own body, everything is wide awake. I'd just finished doing the dishes. The house was quiet, except for the hum of the old fridge and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Again with the rain. It always seemed to show up when things got too heavy to carry dry. Ethan was sketching at the table. I could see the top of his head, the way his pencil moved in short, confident strokes. He was working on something new, something personal, he said. But he wouldn't let me see it yet. I made us both a cup of tea. Cinnamon and black. just how he liked it. When I handed him the mug, he smiled, but it wasn't his usual smile. This one felt sad, tired, like something was breaking inside of him and he didn't know how to hold it together anymore. I sat down across from him, and for a while, we just drank in silence. Then he spoke, slowly, deliberately. He talked about his mom, about how, some days, he could still hear her voice, and other days, he couldn't remember what she sounded like at all. He said he felt untethered, like he didn't belong anywhere, like he was walking through life with no map, no anchor, no one who really saw him. And then he looked at me. "Except for you," he said, barely above a whisper. "You're the only one who feels real." I swallowed hard. My fingers gripped the edge of my mug like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. I wanted to tell him that I understood, that I knew what it was like to feel invisible, to feel like the whole world had moved on without you. But the words wouldn't come. Because the truth is, he wasn't invisible to me. Not anymore. And that terrified me. He stood up, walked around the table, and sat beside me. Close. Too close. My breath caught. There was this unbearable silence between us, so thick, so full of everything we hadn't said. And then, he reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear. Slowly, carefully, reverently. "You're beautiful," he said. I shook my head, eyes stinging. "Don't," I whispered. "Please, don't." But my voice didn't sound convincing, even to me. His hand brushed against my cheek, soft and warm. And then, he kissed me. It was gentle at first, like a question. And I froze. Everything inside me screamed, "Stop. Move. Say something. This can't happen." But I didn't move. I didn't stop him. Because the truth is, part of me wanted it. Desperately. I hadn't been touched like that in years. Not with affection. Not with awe. Not with feeling. The kiss deepened, not frantic, not rough. Just slow. Painfully slow. Like he was memorizing every inch of emotion he'd buried for months. And I let it happen. I let it wash over me. Let myself forget, for one fleeting moment, who we were supposed to be. When it ended, he looked at me. Not like a boy looking for approval. Not like a nephew looking for comfort. He looked at me like I was something sacred. Like I was something holy. And all I felt was shame. Crushing, suffocating shame. I stood up quickly, backing away like the air between us had turned to fire. I didn't say anything. Couldn't say anything. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking. My thoughts were spiraling out of control. What have I done? He looked at me, his face open, searching, scared. But I couldn't meet his gaze. I turned away, went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and cried, not because I didn't want him, but because I did. And that was the worst part. I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. What kind of person lets something like that happen? What kind of woman loses herself in the arms of someone who trusted her, someone who should have been off limits? What kind of woman welcomes it? I didn't sleep that night. I laid in bed, replaying every second of it, his eyes, his touch, his voice, my weakness. And when the sun rose, everything looked the same. But nothing was. Things only spiraled from here. Subscribe to Heartfelt Tales Unfold so you don't miss what happens next, because this story is far from over. The morning after, I woke up to the sound of birds chirping outside the window, as if the world had no idea what had just happened inside my walls. Everything looked the same. The curtains swayed gently in the breeze. The teacup from the night before still sat untouched on the nightstand. My slippers were neatly tucked at the foot of the bed, exactly where I left them. But I wasn't the same. I felt hollow. Like something inside me had cracked and nothing could fill it now. When I finally stepped out of my room, the hallway was quiet. Ethan's door was closed. No music playing. No scent of his usual morning coffee. Just silence. And silence has a way of being louder when it's carrying guilt. We didn't speak that morning. Didn't even look at each other. I went through the motions: coffee, breakfast, dishes, but I couldn't stay still. I felt exposed. Raw. Like every surface in the house had eyes, and they'd all seen what I'd done. So I started leaving. More errands. Longer walks. Trips to the grocery store for things I didn't need. Anything to avoid being in that house with him. I thought maybe, if I just created enough space, it would disappear. That kiss. That night. That moment. But it didn't. It clung to me quiet and invisible, but everywhere. Ethan, to his credit, didn't push. But he also didn't pretend like nothing had happened. Every time we crossed paths, his eyes would search mine, soft, pleading, confused. And I couldn't hold his gaze. Because when I looked at him, I didn't see my nephew. I saw the boy who kissed me like I was air and he was drowning. I saw the moment I let myself forget who I was supposed to be. 3 days passed like that, each one heavier than the last. Until finally, on the 4th morning, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was folded once. No envelope. Just my name written on the front in his handwriting. I stood there for a long time, staring at it. My hands trembled as I unfolded the paper. I don't know what last night meant to you, but it meant something to me. I didn't mean to make things worse. Please talk to me. Ethan, I sat down, right there at the table, and cried, because it was easier to be angry, easier to avoid, easier to pretend like I was the only one hurting. But that note? That reminded me that he was hurting too. And maybe worse, he was confused. I wanted to protect him from the weight of it. But how do you protect someone from something you helped create? I didn't write back. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I started having dreams. Vivid ones. Some beautiful. Some terrifying. In one dream, we were in the kitchen, laughing. He reached out and took my hand, and it felt like peace. Simple. Pure. Like love stripped of shame. But in another dream, my sister was there. She looked at me, disappointed. Heartbroken. She didn't speak, but her eyes said it all. How could you? I'd wake up gasping, covered in sweat. Sometimes with tears on my pillow. My body torn between two truths, revulsion and longing. I wanted to erase it, but part of me relived it night after night because it was the only time it felt real. And that scared me most of all. I'd find myself sitting on the edge of my bed in the middle of the night, replaying the kiss. The way his lips trembled slightly. The heat of his palm against my cheek. The way he looked at me, not like I was broken, but like I was still whole. And I hated myself for missing it. I hated myself for feeling like something had been taken away, instead of something to be ashamed of. I started avoiding mirrors. Started wearing clothes that were baggy and plain. Tied my hair up. Stopped wearing lipstick. Like maybe, if I could make myself invisible again, the feelings would go with it. But they didn't. They followed me through every room. Every conversation. Every second I stood too close to him, or not close enough. I could feel the shift in Ethan too. He was quieter. Less sure of himself. He stayed in his room more, stopped showing me his sketches, stopped laughing at his own jokes. And still, neither of us said a word about what happened. Because saying it meant admitting it was real. Meant facing the cost. Meant choosing between guilt and truth. And neither of us was ready for that. Not yet. There's a kind of silence that doesn't comfort you. It condemns you. That was the kind of silence I lived in after the kiss. It wrapped around me like a shroud. Heavy. Suffocating. Unrelenting. I couldn't eat properly. I'd chew and swallow, but the food tasted like cardboard. I'd sit in front of the TV, pretending to watch something, anything, but my mind was never really there. It was trapped, on that night, on that moment, on that choice. The worst part? I didn't know if I regretted it for the right reasons, or just because it happened. I'd catch myself staring out the window for hours, asking myself questions I didn't want to answer. Was I a terrible aunt? A selfish woman desperate for affection, grabbing onto the first warm body that saw her? Was I broken? Lonely to the point of delusion? Was I the predator in this story? And the one that hit me like a blade every time? Would my sister hate me for this? God. That one always gutted me. I could picture her face so clearly soft, full of light. The way she used to smile with her whole body. She trusted me. With Ethan. With her son. With her whole world. And here I was. holding that trust like a fragile, broken thing in my shaking hands. I tried to talk about it once. Booked a session with a therapist. Sat on that gray couch, surrounded by framed degrees and flickering candles, with tissues already placed on the table like they knew what I was about to say. The therapist had kind eyes. She asked about my divorce, about the transition back to single life, about grief, isolation, loss. I nodded, gave her half-truths, enough to sound honest. But when she asked, "Is there something you're afraid to tell me?" I opened my mouth and closed it again. The words were right there, sitting on the edge of my throat, waiting to be set free. But I couldn't say them, because once I did, once I told someone, there'd be no more pretending. No more maybe it wasn't that bad. No more soft lies to sleep next to. So I shook my head. "No," I whispered. "Not yet." I left that session feeling more trapped than I had walking in. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor in the dark and considered asking Ethan to leave. To pack up his things and go. It would have been cleaner, easier, safer. But how do you ask someone to leave when they feel like the only piece of light left in your life? How do you say, "Go," when all your body wants is to say, "Stay"? And what if he did leave, and took that light with him? The idea of that. It was unbearable. I didn't tell him. Instead, I distanced myself. Again. Pulled away when he got close. Kept our conversations brief. Filled the space with meaningless errands and projects and lists, anything to avoid the tension that still danced in the air between us. But even then, even with the distance, he found a way to get through. A few days later, I found something on my pillow. A frame. Simple. Wooden. Inside was a photo he'd taken weeks earlier of the two of us sitting on the back porch, bathed in golden afternoon light. I remembered the day clearly. We'd just finished planting herbs together. Our hands were covered in dirt, and I had laughed, really laughed, because he'd gotten soil on his nose. He looked so free in that moment. And so did I. Under the photo, in his handwriting, was a short note. "No one's ever made me feel seen like you." I held the frame to my chest, and I swear my heart cracked in two. Because I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab him and tell him to stop. That this wasn't love. That it couldn't be. I wanted to hold him. To apologize for all the times I pulled away. For the confusion I'd caused. For the ache I saw in his eyes every time I passed him in the hall like he didn't matter. But most of all, I wanted to disappear. To vanish into thin air. To erase myself from the story. To stop being the person who let the line blur, who let the silence linger, who wanted what she shouldn't. I lay down that night with the photo frame beside me. I stared at the ceiling, tears slipping silently down the sides of my face. And I whispered into the dark, "What am I doing? Who am I becoming? And is there still time to stop?" But the silence didn't answer. It never does. I still don't know how to define what happened between us. Was it a mistake? A lapse in judgment? A moment of weakness wrapped in the disguise of comfort? Or was it something else entirely? A moment of emotional rescue that went too far? Something born from two broken people trying to stitch their wounds together in the dark, only to realize they might have sewn themselves into the same unraveling fabric? The truth is, I don't have an answer. I've replayed it in my mind 1,000 times, and every time, the lines blur a little more. One minute, I feel disgusted with myself. The next, I feel a kind of sadness, for both of us. And sometimes I wonder if what happened between us was the only real thing I've felt in a long time. That's the part that hurts the most. Because it wasn't just physical. It was emotional, deep, human, and yet, it felt like betrayal. To my sister, to Ethan, to myself. So now I'm asking you, have you ever been in a situation that didn't fit into the neat boxes of right or wrong? Have you ever felt so lonely, so unseen, that you mistook comfort for love? Please, share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you would have done. Tell me if you understand, or if you don't. Because I need to hear voices outside my own echo chamber. I need to know I'm not entirely lost in this. And if you've made it this far into the story, then I know something in it touched you, even if just a little. So don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon Because here on Heartfelt Tales Unfold, we don't shy away from the messy, the uncomfortable, the raw truths of what it means to be human. We tell the stories that live in the shadows, the ones no one else dares to speak aloud. And believe me, there's more where this came from. If there's one thing this has taught me, it's that sometimes the lines blur. Not because we're careless. Not because we're reckless. But because we're human. And human beings are messy, flawed, complicated. We want to be good. We want to do the right thing. But sometimes, all we really want is to be seen. To be held. To be told you matter. And when no one gives us that, when the silence in our lives grows louder than our conscience, that's when the cracks begin to form. That's when we make decisions we never thought we were capable of. If you're ever in that kind of pain, please talk to someone. Call a friend. Find a therapist. Write it down. Cry in the shower. Scream into a pillow. Do whatever it takes to let that ache out. But don't let it fester in the dark. Because silence? It has a way of shaping you into someone you don't recognize until it's too late. And if you're on the outside of a story like this, looking in with judgment, I get it. It's easy to say what should have happened when you're not the one sitting in the stillness of a lonely house with a fragile heart. But for those who've been there, you know how easily affection can start to feel like oxygen. How quickly survival can be mistaken for love. And how some stories don't have tidy endings. Some don't end at all. They just linger, in memories, in dreams, in the questions we carry quietly through life. Some stories don't end with closure. They end with questions you carry, forever. Thank you for listening. And thank you for not looking away.